Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 174, and we're going to talk about Chinese university students in the United States of America, or at least, their desire for freedom. A couple things before we get started. I just heard RFK is going to make an announcement tomorrow. A lot of people are speculating that perhaps they are going to not only discontinue their presidential run, but also to throw their support in behind Trump. And I had said yesterday that his VP pick, Shanahan, mentioned that the priority might be to keep Harris out of the White House. Again, there are a lot of things I don't know about, but the fact that the Democrats are able to sort of somehow find a lot of votes that suddenly in the middle of the night, it makes everything kind of you know uncertain in terms of how things are going to pan out. I heard Ron Paul discussing in his Liberty Report episode today some of the potentials that I had mentioned yesterday. So that was pretty cool. I also want to give you a heads up. The school year begins next week on Monday. I'm going to try to keep doing a daily podcast because it's easier, I think, to generate some kind of listenership that way. But they will be released a little bit later in the day, which I think really doesn't matter because a lot of people sort of wait till the next day before they listen to the episode that I upload later in the afternoon. Anyway, so one of the great things about teaching at a large state university is the variety of students. Not only do you see racial diversity, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic, age diversity, but also geographical diversity, not only within the United States, but also globally speaking. So my old university, I think before the lockdowns happened, there was the rumor or the speculation that there was about 1,000 Chinese mainland students at the enrolled at the university, and people encouraged it because they of course were paying out of state tuition, which is a lot higher than in-state students, right? And there's no way they're going to get financial aid, so they were paying everything. So that was kind of good for, I guess, the university. But for me, it was great because you couldn't have a class. Every section that you taught generally would have a Chinese student. And sometimes their English wasn't that great, but most of them, if they were able to enroll into regular classes, that means their English was uh, actually very good. So also, I think that when your name comes up in a closed community like the Chinese students who were at Temple University, and it was my understanding that pretty much every major university in the United States had a large Chinese student population. It's just that where I taught had more of the lower income side of the Chinese students. To give you an understanding of what I mean, I saw an article about where like there was something like 12, 12 Lamborghinis that were at Penn State main campus, right? So because and Chinese students there, they were so rich that they would just basically buy them in cash, and if they got into an accident, they wouldn't go through the trouble of repairing it. They would just buy a new one. And I think I might have talked about this before, but why were they doing that? Well, because they are stuck with so many dollars, right? So their families are owners of the companies who are trading with the United or selling their stuff to America. America is giving them dollars, Except with the dollars, what are you going to buy? What, how do you spend those dollars? You're going to spend it on luxury goods here, maybe farmland in the United States. And we saw this before with the Japanese when there was a trade imbalance in the 70s. So the Japanese, what are they trying to, what do they do with all of the dollars? Well, they started buying all the factories here in the United States. And that pretty much is what's going to happen. As soon as you have a trade imbalance, those other countries, they're going to try to get rid of their dollars, but the only way you're going to get rid of them is by buying things at the place where dollars are accepted as the currency. And so that's a partial explanation of why Chinese are buying up farmlands all over the place, right? So there might be something more nefarious about the purchase of farmland, but it might be also that missile silos are located in some of the best farm regions in the United States. Who knows? I don't know. So I would always have a lot of Chinese students, right? And I think it's because when they find out a professor is easy, or maybe they teach in a way that is kind of interesting, they tell their friends, and so their friends line up to take your class. So I try not to hold any preconceptions. But rather try to learn from them, right? Try to get as much information from them as possible, to sort of affirm or forced me to adjust some of the theories that I had about people all over the world. So I had students from not just China, but from the Middle East, right? Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Palestine, everywhere, the Caribbean, other parts of the United States. And it's great to see that no matter how much you want to try to normalize a certain way of thinking, yeah, there is a tremendous amount of diversity, even if it's only anecdotally affirmed, right? But one of the brightest students that I had from China, his English was awesome. So he wasn't in the ESL section, and he always sat in the front seat and was there for every class, and just was just really eager to learn. And so we got into this conversation. It was in the middle of class. It had just come up and was kind of relevant. And I thought it would be good for all of the other students in the class to hear what a real Chinese person is thinking. And so we had these conversations in the middle of class. And he talked about how on the flight over to America, he was so excited. Him and his friends, they were just like, all jazzed up because they wanted to see what real freedom was all about, right? So America was supposed to be the land of the free, and so they were like, I can't wait to experience this freedom. And not to sully his vision, but it's not just academic freedom, but also business freedom or even sexual freedom, so all of this kind of stuff, right? Because remember, they had a one child only policy for a long time. And so the what do you call it? The balance or the percentage, the ratio of men versus women is awfully skewed. I mean, it's so bad over there. You have so many men, very few women. And so even that sexual component it's kind of a real thing. Anyway, so when he landed here, he was shocked. I mean, he was absolutely dumbfounded about how it was not free here. In other words, he said to us that it was freer in China in a lot of different ways. And I wanted to make note that the desire for freedom is universal. It's not, oh, those Chinese people don't like freedom. No, it's their government which prevents the people from having freedom because they're all about control. Hey, they're Asians. But then that desire to control others is also as universal as the desire for people who are not in positions of power to be able to do what they want. Excuse me. Um, so one of the things that we discussed was how corporate taxes are much higher here in the United States than they are in China. Like I think the max rate was like 25% or something like that. And in the United States, it's in the 30s. And then if you calculate all of the other taxes, right? All of the other taxes that you have to pay, it's it's pretty high, right? And so that was shocking to him, right? Which country is the communist country where, you don't get to keep what you earn, right? And we also talked about the feudal era, how serfs were considered near slaves because their tax rate was 25%, right? And we're paying a lot more than that today. And so, students were always kind of shocked about how high the level of taxes are here in the United States. And then to add to that, uh, tips. What's a tip? I paid you the price and now I got to give you more money on top of that. And so, these kinds of concepts were difficult for him to get over. And he did share too that at the time, this was about 5 years ago, their government was not as long armed as it is here. So they couldn't, be everywhere all of the time. Maybe things have changed over the last 5 years with cell phones and whatnot, but never underestimate their ability to try to, circumvent the system. Anyway, so there were a lot of places, particularly in the rural areas, that were much more free, right? So there were lots of regulations, but there was no one to enforce them. There was no one to police them. And so as long as you didn't draw too much attention to yourself, people left you alone. And when I mean draw attention to yourself, uh, that includes making too much money, right? And that's a problem here in the United States as well. So low level tax evasion, tax avoidance, like going to a different town to buy your electronic equipment instead of buying it in your hometown because the taxes are lower over there. That's tax avoidance. So that kind of low level tax avoidance is sort of ignored. But of course, if you start importing lower tax goods into your area, well, now you're a smuggler, right? So as long as you didn't do something on such a scale that you drew attention of the authorities, you were fine. And the Chinese are very good at exploiting every avenue of getting around government restrictions. So internet, all the social media sites are banned in China. So they have VPNs. What is that? Virtual something networks, right? Where you can pretend that you are surfing the internet from a different country, a different location. In addition to that, there are probably other ways to beat the system, and they exploit that all the time. But it's a shock. It was a shock to them to see how eager so many Americans were to regulate each other, right? Karens will be the death of this country, if you think about it. I mean, people can't mind their own business, right? They have to somehow insert themselves into the lives of others. And I think they imagined a place where everyone left each other alone. And everyone was allowed to explore all the endless choices in everything, right? The land of opportunity. So suffice to say that he was disappointed, him and his friends. I mean, they didn't even hear. I mean, so it was a weird thing, right? I saw this meme. Do Chinese people get upset when they come to America and buy souvenirs that are made in China, right? So he came to America and he said they don't even talk about capitalism and the free market here in this country. Like my class was the only class that would talk about freedom and the free market. So it was really interesting. I had another student, and I taught him. Must have been online. He was an online student, so I never actually met him face to face. But and I always assumed that students never paid attention to the videos that I would upload. And it turns out that he actually listened very, very hard. He reached out to me like a semester later, after a semester after his class had ended. Yeah, it reached out to me and said, "We have to meet." And I said, "Oh, what do you want to talk about?" And he goes, "I can't tell you." And I was like, okay, that's kind of cryptic and weird. So then he came to my office and and he looked awful. Right? He looked like he hadn't bathed in a while. He was extremely unkempt. I didn't know what he looked like before, but I mean, he looked like he was in a mess. He was a mess. And he told me that it was coming near the time where he had to go back to China. But if he went back, right, after taking my class and learning about freedom and, all the possibility and the potential of having a free society, he couldn't go back without censoring himself, right? He basically told me that if he went back, he would never be able to share with anybody what he really thought about society, about ideas. Like he'd never be able to do that. But then if he did not go back, his family would get into a lot of trouble. And he implied that they would get arrested, right? And so he was like, what do I do? So he came to me asking me what to do. You gave me all these ideas of freedom, but what do I do with it? And so I gave him some advice, like, you have to know very, very well what the rules are and try to figure out how you can act, what you can say without getting yourself in trouble. So it's a double-edged sword talking about freedom, right? So it is incredibly awesome, but then in a authoritarian society, in a society which doesn't understand or know freedom, these are dangerous ideas. And unfortunately, the United States is becoming more and more a country where ideas of freedom become associated with National Socialism, the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeitersparty, that party over in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. And that's kind of crazy. Um, and it's unfortunate. But nevertheless, that's why we have to continue to speak and teach and share the ideas of freedom the way I would do it in class. That a lot of people, it's funny. It's not just the Chinese students that were amazed at hearing the ideas of freedom and the potential of the free market and capitalism properly understood, but it was all the American students too. Like they all told me, like the vast majority of them, like 97% of them told me that they had never heard of this explanation of capitalism, right? So whenever they would hear about capitalism, it was always that, horrible, evil system that, didn't care about the weak and the vulnerable. And it was not even close to being reality. And so it was the American students, in addition to the Chinese students, who were getting kind of a first look at what their society was supposed to be. Um, Now, I didn't just teach out of the book, so to speak. I didn't say, well, this is what capitalism is. This is what the free market's supposed to be. Test on Friday. That's not the way I taught. But what I would do is I would try to show how all of the books that we read throughout the semester was relevant and had something to teach to students. And it was easy for me to do that because of the methodological approach that I would share with students, part that I shared with you guys not too long ago. But each reading that we do is someone's perspective, someone's subjective perspective on the world, the problems as they see it because of the way they see the world. And so from their position, they're going to now try to share with us in writing the solution that they came up with, right? And so that's basically how I would teach each book. This is the world they live in. They see these problems because of this is what was going on in their society, in their part of the world at that time. This was the technology that was available to them. This was the knowledge that they were most familiar with. And so therefore, this is what they would conclude. And so a lot of their search or a lot of their writing is the search for more information. And the conclusion that they reach is based on the information that they were able to acquire. And so basically, and it doesn't matter what the genre was, it can be a scientific type writing, it can be psychology, religion, literature, it doesn't matter. They are all just simply a subjective perspective on the world and how they understood the world. Now, they weren't necessarily truth claims, but it was just their subjectivity. And so everyone could learn if they wanted to the lessons from that subjectivity and then improve their own subjectivity, how they saw the world, right? Is it similar? Is it not? Right. So just to disagree with an author means nothing, right? And it means that you really don't understand what studying books is all about, right? The book is a package of that person's subjectivity, right? Of course, you're going to disagree with most of it, right? Unless you're cherry picking certain ideas. But of course, you're going to disagree with 99% of it because it's someone else's subjectivity. But there are lessons that we can learn in terms of the patterns of thinking, where to find solutions to ideas, why certain methodologies are flawed. We can learn all of these different things. In other words, we should not allow our prejudice or our subjectivity, right, our narrow subjectivity, you know, cause us to sort of, I'm losing my words here, to ignore or sort of dismiss, that's the word, dismiss the ideas and the subjectivities of others, right? So I also, in addition to this, so okay, so if that's what we're doing, then what do I do? How do I come up with solutions for my own problems? And so I would talk about how each of these people came up with their solutions out of their own life, out of their own experience. It's not a top down edict, authoritarian type fashion, right? But rather it is this organic coming from yourself, wrestling with your own problems, trying to solve your own problems, which you then go on to share with other people. And sometimes these new ideas revolutionize society, changes society. And so your solution turns out to be the solution that everyone was waiting for, everyone was looking for, was waiting for someone else to propose, right? I'll give you an example. So Charles Harrison, I don't know if you know that name. Charles Harrison used to work for Sears and Roebuck. And in the 1950s, he invented or came up with the idea of the plastic garbage can, right? So now we see brute trash cans everywhere. Well, the first plastic trash can was invented by Charles Harrison. And the reason why he came up with it was because where he lived, he was woken up like several times a week because the garbage men would come to pick up the garbage from his apartment complex, and the trash cans were all made of metal, and so when they would dump out the trash, it would always wake him up. The racket was just so loud, and so he's like, man, how do I get some more sleep? You know what, if they had a quieter trash can, I wouldn't have this problem. And bam, now you have plastic garbage bins, right? In other words, we come up with innovative ideas, we come up with solutions from our own lives, right? Because of the things that we are struggling with, it gives us that inspiration, that idea to come up with something different, right? And so that's how I would teach innovation, right? You don't have to take an idea from some professor and saying, hey, the world is struggling with poverty, solve poverty. I'll give you 2 weeks, which is what all my colleagues were doing. They gave them the problem. They gave them the knowledge with which they're supposed to work to come up with a solution. And at the end of every semester, they came up with the same solution, the same proposals. Nothing was original. And they couldn't figure out why. All right. Whereas my class was always coming up with these weird, crazy, never thought of that, pitch proposals that we have for this pitch contest at the end of the semester. And it was pretty entertaining. It was interesting. And the students themselves, began to see how the system works, how the free market actually works, and what all this education is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you ideas, give you, um, uh, the way to look into other people's subjectivities, glean some inspiration, and then come up with a solution for yourself. I mean, isn't that what education is all about? Learning how to critique information that you hear, figure out where to find new information to solve your everyday problem, right? Not problems that society is telling you is a problem, like climate change. I mean, that's not going to help you today. It's not going to help you with the problems you're wrestling with today. So, how do I solve the problem that I'm really losing sleep over, literally right now? And that's how you do it. It's through the free market. And I'm hoping that all those Chinese students, when they went back to China, that they could remember some of those lessons and help to bring about some change, at least on that end, right? And so hopefully there'll be some sort of intellectual revolution here in the United States where people remember the ideas of freedom, the potential and the hope of freedom, and then start spreading that education and knowledge and understanding about freedom, right? And so then now, instead of trying to go to war with each other, those people rise to positions of power and figure out how to get along with each other in peace. That's it for today. So stay free, people. I'll talk to you tomorrow.